In the story of rock music, few bands feel as permanent as the Rolling Stones. They began in London in 1962, at a time when young British musicians were obsessing over American blues, rhythm and blues, and early rock and roll records. But what made the Stones different was not just that they loved that music. It was the way they filtered it through attitude, danger, and rhythm. Over more than 6 decades, they became one of the most popular and influential bands in the world, not by staying frozen in one era, but by repeatedly adapting while keeping a recognizable core, sharp guitars, swaggering vocals, and a groove that made rock feel physical. The first stable version of the band brought together Mick Jagger on vocals, Keith Richards on guitar, Brian Jones as a multi-instrumentalist, Bill Wyman on bass, and Charlie Watts on drums. Keyboardist Ian Stewart had also been part of the group's earliest identity, but manager Andrew Loog Oldham moved him out of the official lineup, believing he did not fit the band's image. Stewart remained deeply connected as road manager and keyboard player for sessions and tours. In the beginning, Brian Jones was the main leader, especially because of his knowledge of blues. But as the band developed, the creative center shifted toward the songwriting partnership of Jagger and Richards. At first, the Rolling Stones were not trying to become pop songwriters. They were a blues and rock and roll band, playing cover versions of music that had come from artists across the Atlantic. That mattered, because their sound was rooted in something rougher than the polished pop often associated with early 1960s Britain. Their performances emphasized rhythm, repetition, tension, and release. When the British invasion hit America in 1964, the Stones arrived as a darker alternative to cleaner-cut groups. They became linked to youth culture and rebellion, not only because of how they sounded, but because of the image they projected, restless, defiant, and uninterested in respectability. Manager Andrew Loog Oldham pushed Jagger and Richards to write original material, and that decision changed the band's future. Their breakthrough as writers came with songs that sounded simple on the surface but carried enormous force. In 1965, I Can't Get No Satisfaction became more than a hit single. Its guitar riff, frustrated lyrics, and pounding drive captured a feeling of modern discontent. The same year, Get Off of My Cloud reinforced their rebellious identity. By 1966, Paint It Black showed they could take darker themes and unusual textures into the mainstream. The Stones were no longer just interpreters of blues and rock. They were creating their own language. The album Aftermath, released in 1966, marked a major turning point because it was their first album made entirely of original material. That was important in the 1960s, when rock albums were becoming more than collections of singles and filler. Aftermath showed that the Rolling Stones could build a full artistic statement from their own ideas. The band's music was expanding, and Brian Jones contributed unusual instrumentation that widened their palette. They were still rooted in blues and rhythm, but now they were exploring character studies, social moods, and sharper arrangements. It helped establish them as artists with a direction, not just performers riding a trend. Like many major bands of the late 1960s, the Rolling Stones flirted with psychedelia. In 1967, they scored a double-sided hit with Ruby Tuesday and Let's Spend the Night Together, showing two sides of the band, melodic sensitivity and provocative energy. That same year, their Satanic Majesty's Request pushed them into psychedelic rock, full of experimental sounds and surreal atmosphere. But the Stones' deepest strength was never escapist fantasy. By the end of the decade, they returned to a tougher rhythm and blues-based sound. That return produced some of their most defining work, because it fused their early blues instincts with the confidence of a band that had survived fame, controversy, and rapid change. From 1968 into 1969, the Rolling Stones entered one of the most celebrated stretches of their career. Jumpin' Jack Flash announced a renewed, harder-edged sound. Beggar's Banquet followed, featuring songs like Sympathy for the Devil and Street Fighting Man, where the band's music collided with the political and social unrest of the era. Then came Let It Bleed, with You Can't Always Get What You Want and Gimme Shelter. These were not just rock songs, they sounded like a world becoming unstable. The band captured dread, desire, violence, and resilience in a way that made their music feel larger than entertainment. The end of the 1960s also brought tragedy and transformation. Brian Jones left the band in 1969, only weeks before his death. His departure closed the first chapter of the Stones, because he had been central to their formation and early sound. Guitarist Mick Taylor replaced him, bringing a more fluid and technically refined lead guitar style. Around this time, the band was introduced on stage as the greatest rock and roll band in the world, a phrase that would follow them for decades. It was bold, almost absurd, but it captured what they were becoming, not just hitmakers, but a live institution built around danger, charisma, and endurance. In 1970, the Rolling Stones formed their own label, Rolling Stones Records, and with it came one of the most famous images in music history, the tongue and lips logo. Their first album on the label, Sticky Fingers, arrived in 1971 and produced classics like Brown Sugar and Wild Horses. It also began a run of 8 consecutive #1 studio albums in the United States. Sticky Fingers showed the band mastering a mix of hard rock, blues, country textures, and emotional ballads. The logo, the music, and the attitude all worked together. The Stones were turning themselves into a brand before rock branding became ordinary. The early 1970s cemented the Stones' myth. Exile on Main Street, released in 1972, was messy, dense, and deeply rooted in American musical traditions, featuring songs like Tumbling Dice and Happy. It did not sound polished in a conventional way, it sounded lived in, like rock, blues, gospel, country, and soul spilling out of a basement at 3 a.m. Goat's Head Soup followed in 1973 with Angie, proving the band could still deliver a major ballad. But by the end of 1974, Mick Taylor left. Ronnie Wood, known from Faces, eventually became his replacement, bringing a looser guitar chemistry with Keith Richards that helped define the next version of the group. The Stones did not simply coast through the late 1970s and 1980s. They responded to changing musical climates while keeping their identity intact. Some Girls, released in 1978, reflected the energy of punk, disco, and New York nightlife, with songs like Miss You and Beast of Burden. Tattoo You in 1981 gave them Start Me Up, one of their most recognizable late-career anthems. Later, Steel Wheels in 1989 was widely seen as a comeback album, followed by Voodoo Lounge in 1994. These releases mattered because they proved the Stones could survive internal tensions, shifting trends, and the challenge of aging in a genre built on youth. As the recording industry changed, the Rolling Stones became one of the greatest live attractions in music history. Their stadium and arena tours turned concerts into massive global events, and by 2007 they had broken the record for the highest-grossing concert tour 3 times. Even decades after their first hits, they remained a top live draw, becoming the highest-earning live act of 2021. The lineup also continued to evolve. Bill Wyman departed in 1993, with Daryl Jones becoming their regular bassist. Charlie Watts died in 2021, and Steve Jordan became their regular drummer. Yet the core idea of the band continued: the riff, the rhythm, the performance, the spectacle. The Rolling Stones' later years underline how unusual their story is. Hackney Diamonds, released in October 2023, was their first new album of original material in 18 years and became their 14th #1 album in the United Kingdom. Their latest album, Foreign Tongues, followed in July 2026. Across their career, they have sold an estimated total of more than 250 million albums, won 4 Grammy Awards, received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, and entered both the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the UK Music Hall of Fame. But their legacy is bigger than statistics. The Stones helped define what a rock band could be: rebellious, adaptable, imperfect, and still moving forward after 6 decades. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.